Lost my childhood safety net, trapped in my thoughts during the pandemic. Dad died. Family fell apart. Finally, I self-destructed. I would like to say that I do not frequently use Reddit, and I highly doubt that anyone I know is aware of this account. If you are not interested in childhood events that I am not entirely sure how to categorize, feel free to scroll past. I need to discuss this as it has been troubling me lately. Please forgive any spelling errors, as I am not a native English speaker and learned the language independently through YouTube and other social media platforms. These experiences may be disjointed due to my poor memory. Hence, I appreciate your understanding as you read this. I apologize if my writing does not adhere to traditional literary standards. Once again, this will be lengthy, so if you are not interested in long, tangled thoughts, feel free to skip over it. Before I start, I want to issue a warning: there are significant descriptions of suicidal tendencies and distressing events, at least from my perspective. This emotional turmoil began in 2019. I was 14 at the time. I found myself in bed, gradually coming to terms with my situation. I became increasingly aware of the events occurring around me. The onset of the pandemic in 2020 left me isolated at home. Unable to even retrieve groceries or take out the trash, I felt trapped in a small apartment, engulfed by heavy, oppressive thoughts. I found it difficult to endure that period, and drawing became my solitary outlet for stress relief. I have enjoyed drawing since I became self-aware at around 3 or 4 years old. I engage in both traditional and digital art, and this pastime, along with YouTube entertainment, provided some solace. Now, for some background on my life. I was born into a financially struggling family, being the youngest among all my siblings and cousins. While the adults in my life were fond of me due to my youth, my siblings and cousins often did not share that sentiment. I would throw tantrums, but isn't that typical behavior for children until a certain age? I was unaware of my feelings, yet I sensed their dislike, as they would often tease or laugh at me instead. It wasn't until I turned 14 that I recognized how starved for affection and conversation I was. As a child, I was quite talkative, but they would tell me to be quiet. I enjoyed playing outside, but that privilege was stripped away when I turned 12 or 13 for my own safety, as our neighborhood was not particularly secure. I was encouraged to only visit parks accompanied by an adult, but when I would ask my siblings, they consistently refused. Some of my phrasing might sound off, so let me provide some context about my family. I reside in a country where many parents leave to work in other nations in search of a better life. My father, who is in his 50s now, became an alcoholic while my mother was pregnant with me. Oftentimes, I blame myself for this, as it appears to be blatantly evident. He did not work, and I have heard stories about him being physically abusive towards my mother, yet he never laid a hand on us, his children. While he loved us, he ultimately succumbed to alcoholism. Many people within our community share similar struggles. I have uncles and aunts who faced the same fate. With that context, my mother moved to another country when I was 6 years old to work, leaving my older sister, then in her early 20s, to take care of me and my 2 brothers, who are currently 29 and 24. It was a challenging situation for all of us, and I often wished to have had more time with my father before he began drinking excessively and to have spent additional time with my mother. When she left, I was heartbroken as I was very much attached to her. That summer, it was disheartening to be on a bus for 2 days away from the parent I cherished. The departure was painful. She initially took me with her for the summer but left without saying anything. I recall being in my uncle's car with my aunts, and when I looked around, my mother was no longer there. I asked why she wasn't joining us, but they simply drove away. That is how I remember it, and for 2 days, I cried continuously until I got home. Generally speaking, we lived in constant poverty and poor conditions. I learned that the police were checking in because my siblings and I were so young and our parents were absent. They would have placed me in an orphanage if my sister had not come up with various excuses. I heard that my best friends were taken by the authorities once, but were eventually returned, although that aspect doesn't trouble me as much. Although my mother's income from abroad improved our living conditions over time, acquiring better furniture, an actual floor, I heard it used to be cement, and an increase in food on the table, I gradually lost my happiness. There were only two individuals in my life who genuinely cared about spending time with me: my mother, who was now gone, and my brother, whom I will refer to as Orlando, the second oldest. Orlando was the one who spent time with me when he was home, but he eventually sought a better life and moved abroad to work, leaving me feeling abandoned. I distinctly remember him telling me about his departure a few days prior on a dark night. I was unsure how to react. Whenever I was allowed to go outside, I would often be afraid, as my sister would assign me homework, and by the time I finished, it was dark outside. In the summer, she compelled me to read and wouldn't let me outside until I could explain what I had read. If I made a mistake, I had to reread the entire book. I remember vividly it was The Little Mermaid, and the original tales that depicted her transformation into sea foam and her ascension to the afterlife. Strangely, I encountered the grim versions of these stories before watching the Disney adaptation, leading me to think they had misrepresented the narratives. I recall failing geography, and instead of encouragement, my sister handed me the notebook, instructing me to memorize all the material. Consequently, I developed a disdain for geography and had to explain everything I had memorized to her. Eventually, I sought help from her boyfriend, who was more understanding and easygoing, unlike her militaristic approach. I felt terrified of confronting her. I even remember crying in the bathroom over this subject. As time passed, I found myself confined at home with limited freedom. The laptop with only access to Chrome became my source of entertainment. Now, regarding my sister, whom I will call Iona. On one hand, I resented her for her behavior, but on the other hand, she was roughly my age currently and lacked experience in raising us or managing the situation. Then there was my brother, whom I will refer to as Raoul. Raoul would play with me during our childhood, although he also enjoyed teasing me. Yet it was the only form of attention I received which I craved. Any attention, no matter how negative, felt necessary. I cannot articulate it well, but I remained ignorant of many aspects as a child. Eventually, as he matured, Raoul began to ignore me. He started hanging out with his friends, while I felt isolated. Over time, I became so starved for attention that I resigned myself to the lack of it. Situations like this began to feel awkward for me, both then and now, and I still struggle with even small talk. Eventually, I developed communication issues that hindered my ability to form friendships, making me incapable of socializing like my brothers did. Eventually, interactions with them dwindled to the point where they only engaged with me if they needed something. They never inquired about my day, or even offered a simple greeting when I came home from school. I became intensely reserved, bottling up my feelings and merely going through each day. As weeks turned into a blur, my grades hovered just above the minimum requirements. The minimum passing grade was 5 out of 10, and I managed to score between 6 and 9, with only a few 5s or 10s here and there. I had a slight preference for mathematics, finding calculus far more enjoyable than literature. I significantly preferred math over reading. It became so overwhelming that I would cry at the thought of being handed a book to read. As the days merged into one another, one of my cousins began spending time with me. She would vent about her daily life, her boyfriends, high school experiences, and even some fabricated stories, but I wasn't bothered. I simply valued her company. Even with my shortcomings, she eventually severed ties with me over something beyond my control. It was something trivial, but to her, it was significant. We are merely acquaintances now. Overall, those years rendered me emotionally numb. I struggled to comprehend emotions like my peers and never truly desired a romantic relationship. The thought never crossed my mind. At 14, I became aware of my family situation, marking the start of my yearning for greater interaction. However, I lacked the knowledge of how to vocalize those needs. My social skills were severely lacking, making it impossible to articulate anything or seek assistance. I attempted to leave subtle hints. A Facebook post served as a clue, but my sister became furious about it and demanded I delete it, labeling me illiterate and warned that if I genuinely felt that way, she would provide me with a reason to feel worse. That had been her way of referencing the Cinderella story. Consequently, I never again sought help. By the time I was 14, I began experiencing suicidal tendencies. I would contemplate cars, high places, and even oncoming trains, envisioning how it would be if I just took that one extra step. I thought about various methods of self-harm, My mind became a dark and unsettling space filled with disturbing thoughts that no 14-year-old should even entertain. Yet, I remained silent. Why would I express anything? And to whom? In 2019, my mother returned, wanting to settle in after her divorce from my father. All that was needed was to remove him from our lives, but then he abruptly died from a heart attack. I was unsure of how to handle the situation. It was all new to me. I can remember that day vividly. I returned home from school and lay in bed, scrolling through my phone. Suddenly, I heard strange noises and went to investigate. My father lay on the ground, covered by our wardrobe, which was made of plastic bars and a cloth with a zipper, and I simply did not know what to do. Eventually, my mother came home, sat him up, laid him back down, and called for an ambulance. Apparently, he had suffered a heart attack, and she was somewhat equipped to handle it based on her prior experiences at work in another country. He passed away in the hospital. Iona spoke with me and informed me of my father's death. I did not cry. She was the one who wept. She hugged me, but I remained unaffected. It felt surreal. I did not cry when I observed his body either. Only when I saw Orlando crying did I shed a few tears. But that was all. They referred to him as a friend, yet I scarcely had any meaningful moments with him, just a few smiles and jokes exchanged, and when he consoled me due to a severe scar on my foot. In truth, they were likely speaking of a man I never truly knew. This left me grappling with many thoughts, leading me to place blame on myself for his passing. Ultimately, I was just not crying. I was perpetually exhausted, burnt out, and weary. No amount of coffee, energy drinks, sugar, or green tea could restore my energy. In 2020, the pandemic struck, exacerbating my negative feelings. No one in my family was willing to purchase Netflix for me so I could watch movies alone, even though they had access to it. I abandoned that notion, realizing it would never happen. After that, the years simply drifted by. In 2022, I lost my only grandfather on my mother's side and my grandmother on my father's side. My paternal grandfather passed away before Raoul was even born. I truly had no opportunity to build a relationship with him. He died from heart failure, following a similar fate as my father and his brother. Subsequently, my grandmother's sister and brother also passed on, leaving her as the only survivor in her family. It was a grim period for me, yet I felt nothing. My paternal grandfather acted more like a father figure to me. We may not have exchanged many words, but he was a good man. I did not cry at any funerals. The year 2022 was a blur, but on December 23, 2022, I recall it clearly. I woke up feeling some symptoms of illness, which I initially dismissed. Eventually, I went online and spoke with my girlfriend. I have been in a long-distance relationship since 2018 and never anticipated dating, but it just happened. We made it official in 2020, although we celebrate the anniversary of our initial connection. I also spoke with 3 others online, including my girlfriend, whom I will refer to as Angela, and a friend named Bob, who, quite frankly, does not deserve a flattering pseudonym. Bob and I met in 2020 and quickly became friends, sharing a bond akin to crackhead friends. Eventually, he developed feelings for me, which I rejected since I had a girlfriend and I'm a guy. He promptly attached himself to a facade of the things I detest about myself and was not even my type. Typically, I do not adhere to a specific gender or sexual orientation, as it feels overly complicated. There are too many classifications, and people become offended, so I refrain from engaging in such discussions. However, Bob was simply not my type. Friends? Absolutely, but lovers? Under no circumstances. Interacting with him felt like dating a brother, and he was not joking when he said he actively attempted to sabotage my relationship with Angela, even claiming that he did so to gain a chance with me. The irony is that he claims to be straight, yet I harbor doubts. Throughout 2022, Bob and I began experiencing conflicts, and on December 23, 2022, everything spiraled out of control. I had been in a state of burnout for months, feeling unmotivated, continually contemplating self-harm, and drawing was something I struggled to engage in. Gradually, I regained some motivation to draw, yet I also started to feel ill. On that particular day, I awoke, turned on my laptop, and noticed that they wished to speak to me in a group chat. Since we resided in different countries, we used Discord to communicate. Bob informed me that Angela had developed feelings for him, which shattered me. I shed silent tears but did not vocalize my distress. Any person would have ended their relationship under such circumstances, yet Angela was my primary source of support during this period. What did I do? I persevered through my illness and burnout to play games with her and engage in voice chats. Bob claimed he did not reciprocate her feelings and wished to ensure that she no longer adored him. He stated that this had occurred because I had been less active recently while he had taken on the primary role. As my health continued to deteriorate, I am unsure how things progressed next, but it reached a point where Angela claimed I won her back. I did not entirely believe it, but it marked the beginning of a tumultuous journey. On the 29th of December, Bob suggested an emulator for Nintendo games, and I downloaded it. I thought I had installed it incorrectly, so I intended to remove it for reinstallation. To my dismay, a prompt asked, "Would you like to delete all associated files?" or something along those lines. When I installed the emulator, it had created 6 additional files on my laptop, so I assumed it referred to them. Unfortunately, I was gravely mistaken. It deleted every meme photo, and most devastatingly, my artwork. 3 years of my life and countless hours dedicated to those drawings evaporated before my eyes. I could not recover them. I spent 3 days with Angela and Bob attempting to figure out how to retrieve my lost files, but ultimately we were unsuccessful. I completely broke down. It was truly traumatic. I cried as if I were reliving the moment when I left my mother behind. I spent New Year's Eve denying the reality of my loss and was at my lowest. I was so unwell that I only consumed medication. My condition worsened to the point where the sweat from my body overwhelmed me. I could barely stand due to dizziness. I implored my mother to take me to the doctor, but she insisted that I could wait it out, even though I was eligible for free health care as a high school student. My circumstances were dire. I was depressed, physically unwell, and utterly devoid of motivation. So, how did Bob respond during this challenging time? He, knowing full well what I was experiencing, displayed his true colors and revealed to Angela screenshots of an unfortunate mistake I made in 2021. The incident was accidental, and it had never happened again. Nevertheless, he kept asserting, "I can't keep this from her any longer. A new year, a new me. I want to treat my friend better." Angela loathed me and refused to speak to me for nearly the entire month of January. I felt entirely isolated. My family dismissed my sense of loss, claiming I had not lost much. The 2 individuals I hoped would support me betrayed my trust. Bob insisted on making himself the center of attention and pushed me further down a dark path. I seriously contemplated self-harm at this low point. There was nothing left for me. The 3rd friend I mentioned was understanding and remained my only composed ally, attempting to assist me. Through him and 2 other friends I encountered through him, I met a girl. She is approximately 2 years younger than me. We began talking and formed a close friendship, offering me comfort and happiness amidst the chaos. I wish I had met her during a more stable time, as I often broke down in voice chats when she supported me. I will refer to her as Eulia. Eulia and I became the new crackheads, finishing one another's sentences and sharing a singular train of thought. Eventually, Angela chose to forgive me for my mistake in 2021, admitting she had not intended to take such harsh measures against me, but the damage had already been done. Bob and I maintained communication for a while, but I resolved to cut him out of my life. He is now permanently blocked. Angela recognized Bob's manipulations as well and severed ties with him. She felt deep remorse for her actions. Following that, I focused on regaining stability. I attended school, completed physical education classes when I lacked energy, studied for my baccalaureate exam, dealt with the stress of driving school, and then everything quieted down. The most straightforward exams triggered breakdowns. I struggled significantly under pressure, but I managed to push through. I completed my studies, and college-related matters came next. I contemplated taking a year off for my mental health, but was faced with a choice: either attend college or work. I am currently in college, grappling with the workload. Ultimately, all of this has weighed heavily on me for the past few days. One morning, I found myself battling with my thoughts to the point that I became overwhelmed, almost crying in public. I cannot afford therapy and lack the means to share any of this with my family, as they likely would not believe me or would not take it seriously. or I simply cannot articulate my feelings to them. To anyone who has persevered through this lengthy post, I apologize for consuming your time. At the same time, I appreciate your reading it. Writing this down was somewhat therapeutic, though not entirely. I am curious if Reddit will even keep this post up, given that my previous posts were removed without explanation. Update: it turns out my girlfriend has developed feelings for another man over the past month. I finally made the decision to break up with her and have unblocked the other guy. I managed to schedule an appointment with a therapist, and I had a pleasant Christmas, to be honest. I realized I was so shattered that the breakup affected me very little. Nevertheless, I feel a sense of relief now. Story 2. I ended 2 6-year friendships after a chaotic trip where I was yelled at on a plane, and then ganged up on during the ride home. Hello everyone. I am using a disposable account for obvious reasons. My narrative is rather extensive, and I apologize for that. However, everything I discuss is pertinent to the situation. I would be truly grateful for genuine advice and for someone to let me know if I am in the wrong here. Here it is. I, 21 female, have maintained friendships since high school with 2 girls. Let's refer to them as Faith and Mia. Recently, we took a 5-day trip together. This was my first time traveling internationally, but it was not theirs. Day 1, I had organized an itinerary to make the most of our destination, but while in the cab on the way to the airport, I discovered that Mia had also created her own itinerary. Mia was extremely enthusiastic, so I decided to set aside my plans and go with hers since some activities overlapped. Mia planned to go to the beach on day 3, which I do not enjoy. However, I thought it would be all right to join my friends and that we would still have a good time. We arrived and got settled. We rented an Airbnb instead of a hotel, and I covered the deposit, approximately $200. After settling in, we took a short walk to explore the area, picked up some groceries, and went to bed. I was eager to wake up early the next day to explore more, so I asked if we could be ready by 9 for a fun day. Faith and Mia complimented me on my French skills, so I jokingly mentioned that I had taken some French classes in college, since we were in a French-speaking country. I was exaggerating and just fooling around, but this detail is important. Day 2 per Mia's itinerary, we planned to visit an old cathedral and an architectural site. We spent most of the day at the architectural site before Faith got hungry, prompting us to eat around 3:00 p.m. We did not return to the site, nor did we visit the cathedral. The city was stunning, and after having lunch, I decided that I preferred to stay and explore further rather than head to the beach. I informed Faith and Mia that I wanted to continue exploring the city. If they preferred to go to the beach, they could do so without me, and I would meet them later. Faith reacted very angrily, scolding me in a loud, offensive manner, almost shouting. She insisted that I should have voiced my feelings earlier, which, I admit, I should have done, but I didn't mind going to the beach until I saw how beautiful the city was and wanted to see more of it. She argued that it was unreasonable for me to suggest we split up since we were on a trip together and that we should all stick together. I struggle with confrontation and experience significant anxiety, which I do not disclose to others out of embarrassment regarding my struggles. When confronted, particularly in a rude manner and in public, I tend to go silent. This is especially true when a friend is the one confronting me. I might remain quiet for a while, a few hours usually, but I do not ignore them. I answer their questions, but I do not initiate conversation because I am still quite affected by the disrespect. In the evening, Faith apologized, and I accepted her apology. Day 3, they entirely abandoned the idea of going to the beach because, according to them, we cannot split up since we are a trio. They wished to sleep in, and Faith expressed a desire to wake up at 5 p.m. I was not keen on this plan, but since I felt like I was on shaky ground with them after resisting the beach, I kept silent. We ended up leaving at 3 p.m., which left us with hardly any time to visit the cathedral because it closed rather early. I wanted to see a square, so we went there, but we stood in the dark for about 5 minutes before returning. I mentioned wanting to go back, and Mia said we could return before heading to the airport. Back at the Airbnb, Mia expressed a desire for us to explore another city, which was included in her original itinerary. When we went to book it, Mia informed us it would cost an additional $100. As a college student, I am quite strapped for cash, and $100 seemed excessive for a day trip within the same country. So I asked if we could reconsider. Ultimately, we agreed to pay $50, which was still steep, but I didn't want to keep complaining, to visit a coastal city, and we planned to leave early the next morning. Additionally, Mia remarked on how impressive it was that I took French classes in college. I clarified that I was just joking, and most of my French knowledge came from textbooks or online resources. Day 4, we caught the bus and arrived at our destination. For context, I brought headphones on this trip, but I only took them out of the Airbnb on days 4 and 5. I decided to use them on day 4 for our 3-hour bus ride to enjoy some music or perhaps a podcast. Upon arrival, we walked toward the beach. Although I did not want to go, following the earlier conflict, I chose to go along with it. After walking for approximately 40 minutes, I decided to put on my headphones during the final stretch. I usually wear them above my ears to still hear others and engage while listening to music. Mia and Faith chastised me, declaring it rude, and I understand their perspective now. I disagreed, stating that my ears were not fully blocked and I could hear and converse. I just wanted to enjoy some music. Additionally, Faith wore her AirPods every single day but claimed she wasn't playing anything, so that was supposedly different. We ended up staying at the beach for 3 hours without doing much, aside from playing some card games. After eating, we took the bus back, tidied the Airbnb, and went to bed since our flight was the next day. Day 5, we checked out early and visited the town square, where Mia was equally excited. There was a secure spot to leave our luggage, but I chose to keep my valuables, phone, passport, headphones with me. While walking, Mia asked us for our controversial opinions, leading to a discussion. While Mia and I were debating a topic, she suddenly interrupted, saying, "Okay, just stop talking." I found this rude and told her so, to which she replied, "I asked for one controversial opinion, not a multitude." What was I meant to say to that? To her credit, she did apologize, but I remained quiet. I engaged when prompted, but I couldn't initiate any conversation because I was still somewhat taken aback. While taking pictures and walking around, I remained silent. Faith noticed that Mia had upset me and I spoke to her about it. I told Faith that there was nothing to discuss because there wasn't. She reluctantly apologized, and that was the end of it. We went to the airport, caught our flight, and found ourselves seated together, playing cards. Things took a turn when I remarked that Faith was taking the game too seriously, which seemed to trigger her. The conflict in the crowded plane, Faith began shouting at me, accusing me of acting childish, claiming she had to follow me around, and stating that when she apologized to me on day 2, she was the bigger person. I had no chance to respond, and she yelled at me to be silent. Mia was sitting between us, and she did not intervene at any point. Trying to avoid the situation, I looked out the window and shed a few tears. I put on my headphones and read for the remainder of the 3-hour flight. At no moment did Faith make any effort to apologize, and Mia didn't even check to see if I was okay. After we landed, I informed Mia that I intended to go home alone instead of with them, but that I would say goodbye. Mia urged me to talk to Faith because Faith had apparently cried after yelling at me. Mia insisted that Faith wanted to apologize. I told Mia I could not maintain a friendship with someone who had yelled at me and belittled me in front of a plane full of strangers, especially since Faith had 3 hours to apologize during the flight and afterward through passport control and at the airport. Mia suggested I should give Faith a chance. As we got on the train to head home, Faith went to find a seat. I opted not to sit with her, remaining standing next to Mia. This is when she began to shout at me once more. Completely shouting, she accused me of talking down to them throughout the trip, being arrogant, and believing I was superior. I was thoroughly confused and asked her to clarify. I also told her to lower her voice. She then accused me of over-explaining things, saying it came off as condescending. To clarify, I am quite nerdy, and when someone mentions a subject that excites me, I tend to ramble about it. This has been my behavior since high school. Note following this, I asked my college friends and others if I come across as condescending or arrogant in my speech. Not a single one believed I had that tendency, not even a little bit. She scolded me for wanting to end my friendship with Faith because it's a 3-way friendship, implying she had a say. She was also upset that I went quiet when there was an issue, so I explained that it's because I don't know what to say. I tend to overthink during the silence, and my anxiety makes it challenging to express myself after a fallout. She responded by aggressively shouting, Don't you dare put that on me. Furthermore, she claimed that she and Faith had discussed many of their issues with me, not just her own concerns. I was taken aback by this revelation. I never imagined they would speak about me behind my back, holding on to grievances for days instead of bringing them to me directly. Thus, I approached Faith's seat to figure out what was happening. Meanwhile, Mia continued to yell. She accused me of being so arrogant that I fabricated a fake qualification for myself, my French college classes, merely to have another reason to look down on her. This accusation was completely unfounded. I merely made a poor joke, but she evidently held such a low opinion of me that she assumed that was my intent. Additionally, Mia claimed I must think they are foolish because I supposedly do not speak to my sisters in this manner, nor to my college friends. Mia had never met my college friends or observed my interactions with my sisters, making her assertion purely speculative. Faith labeled me as selfish and inconsiderate, claiming that everything they did during the trip was to please me and make me happy, particularly after my initial refusal to go to the beach, which I later did join them for. They accused me of bringing my headphones on days 4 and 5 because I had planned to ignore them, asserting that wearing headphones during our walk was disrespectful, to which I concede. I attempted to explain my side, even apologizing for wasting their time and for making them feel belittled, but Mia angrily interrupted me, insisting that my apologies lacked sincerity and empathy. I struggled to interject. The entire train ride, lasting nearly an hour, consisted of them shouting at me. I tried to clarify my perspective, but Mia dismissed it as a monologue and theater. After we disembarked, I continued to apologize repeatedly, and Faith gave a half-hearted apology for her outburst. Mia then acted differently. She suggested we forget everything and be friends again. At this point, having been ganged up on and verbally attacked, I reluctantly agreed. I offered my apologies once more, even going so far as to suggest that I reimburse them for their trip, as I felt I had ruined it so significantly, while shedding tears. Mia commented that it was unfair for me to receive acknowledgement for crying, to which I replied, "You still have the right to be angry." They asserted they were only telling me this because no one else would, wishing to prevent others from viewing me poorly without informing me of my behavior. Mia proceeded to say she believed I considered myself better than her, which struck me as odd since she had just accused me of arrogance. She mentioned that she loved my tendency to over-explain and my articulate communication, remarking that people nowadays often fail to engage in meaningful conversations. Returning home, I felt confused, sad, and exhausted. After several days, I realized I did not deserve this treatment whatsoever. Consequently, I decided to end those friendships. Mia responded with acknowledgement of my feelings and her understanding, but remarked that Faith had tolerated much of my behavior during the trip. She claimed her intention was to provide me with advice since nobody else would, warning me that people might treat me poorly like I experienced in school, having been bullied quite severely. Faith was angered, asserting that she had shown kindness to me and clearly cared more than Mia did. She expressed frustration that I would end our friendship over something so insignificant, and insisted I could not grasp the fact that I did anything wrong. I am genuinely perplexed. Can anyone elucidate my mistakes and determine if I truly deserved this treatment from my friends? I apologize for this lengthy post. Story 3. Discovered my girlfriend led a double life, hiding her true self and relationships. I was left heartbroken and without closure. I discovered my girlfriend was living a double life, and I was left without any closure. During my final year of high school, I experienced a very difficult breakup. It felt like everything was falling apart, but I was once again single and free. Toward the end of that relationship, I grew very close to a girl from my school who was in several of my classes. Our bond strengthened to the point where I helped her secure a job at my workplace, where I had been employed for over a year. Soon after, we began dating. I was ecstatic to be in a relationship with her. There was something about her that I still cannot quite describe. She possessed an enchanting quality that makes my heart warm when I think back on it. I was genuinely and completely in love with her for who she was. She radiated beauty both inside and out, or at least I thought so until I uncovered her hidden truth. After we graduated, we traveled together and spent time in a larger city, exploring and creating memories just the two of us. Those moments now feel like an unshakable dream. She bonded closely with my family, and I with hers. It truly was the kind of relationship every young man envisions. We weren't overly affectionate since she wasn't particularly demonstrative, and I was aware I sometimes overwhelmed her with my feelings and gestures of affection, but there were moments where the feelings were mutual. In my previous relationship, there was a significant sexual component. We engaged in many intimate activities short of actual intercourse. However, with this girl, we never ventured very far. Without going into too many details, I always focused on her pleasure without expecting anything in return, and intimate moments only occurred a couple of times. I respected her boundaries and never pushed her limits, trying not to overanalyze because I was completely smitten with her. When I went off to college and she remained in our hometown, it was close enough for her to visit, and I returned home whenever I could to spend quality time with her. This frustrated my family since I mainly used my parents' home for sleeping and showering. Nevertheless, everything felt as perfect as ever. We exchanged letters whenever we met, and her letters were among the most thoughtful gestures anyone has ever given me. Her visits to my college were some of the best times of my life. We enjoyed our independence and could do whatever we pleased, simply cherishing our time together. It felt like a dream. However, things began to take a troubling turn. She started to disassociate and seemed uninterested in communicating or putting effort into the relationship. I made sincere attempts to understand the situation, but it felt like there was little I could do to resolve the existing issues. At that point, things changed drastically. While searching for a friend on Twitter from high school who had the same first name, I stumbled upon an account featuring my girlfriend's picture that I had no prior knowledge of. My world started to unravel as all the pieces fell into place. I recognized several individuals on her Twitter from the people she had mentioned texting and visiting. At least one of them appeared to have a friendship that was more than platonic. The two of them seemed very affectionate, and it became apparent why I was unaware of this Twitter account. In fact, no one we knew from school or in real life was aware of it. She was leading a double life, and I had just uncovered it. Her entire Twitter presence seemed focused on her identity as a lesbian, or at the very least, a member of the LGBTQ community. While there is certainly nothing wrong with that, I had believed she was straight and that our relationship was serious. Some posts about our prom even included comments about heteronormative activities or pictures with the hashtag #godlegaze. Additionally, there was a screenshot of a text message in which she expressed her disdain for my messages about missing her and wanting to hold her. I was merely 18 and deeply attached to her. The details beyond that are not crucial, aside from the fact that her photos with other girls indicated interactions that went beyond friendship, and some encounters were completely inappropriate. It made me feel physically ill, and when I finally confronted her, she clammed up. I often went long periods without communication from her, and whenever I brought up the topic, there was never any explanation, just silence. Eventually, following my discovery, I returned home to end the relationship. This entire situation plunged me into a profound despair, leading to struggles with various issues and a heavy reliance on smoking due to unmanageable anxiety. I couldn't comprehend what I had done wrong or if any part of it was my fault. Was I merely a facade? I understood why someone might hesitate to come out, but had I been misled? Did she ever truly love me? How much of our relationship was genuine and how much was fabricated? I never received any answers from her, and still to this day, I am left wondering. We spoke over the phone and texted a year or two later, and she mentioned that I will always have a place in her heart. I was so caught up in her that I believed deleting all our pictures, watching our letters and photographs burn, and throwing away the remnants into a river would help me move on. Unfortunately, it didn't work. I find myself thinking about her often, wondering how she is doing and if she is happy. I contemplate whether she kept my letters, and if she didn't, for how long. I think about the necklace from Tiffany's that I got her during our significant trip to the city, and if she still cherishes it. In all honesty, our relationship represented one of the best chapters of my young life. I remember it with a mix of joy and sadness, reflecting on what could have been. I believed I would marry her. I prayed regularly to be deserving of her hand. However, God had a different plan for me, and I am now in a good place in my life. A small part of my heart and mind will always feel broken and confused, pondering what might have been and why things unfolded as they did. I never received closure. I never found my peace, and I lost a piece of myself when I discovered that our relationship was not what I had believed it to be. I am still confused and still hurting. I long for that closure. It took me years to regain my happiness and to live for myself without the cloud of confusion hanging over what had transpired. I endured some deeply depressive episodes and battled with my mental health for quite a long time, but I eventually reclaimed my self-worth and self-esteem. Now things are looking up, and I am living a fulfilling life. However, I cannot deny that I still wonder about the possibilities that could have been. I hope she never sees this. That would be quite embarrassing. Summary: I believed I was in a relationship with the love of my life, only to discover she was engaged in romantic interactions with other women behind my back. The relationship concluded, and I was left without closure, which deeply affected me.